Bonjour, Laure.
Good afternoon, Laure. Good afternoon, everybody. So we'll spend half an hour to speak about Blablacar, and in particular to speak about conversation in Blablacar. As I've said, you're the first employee of Blablacar, so we're speaking about 60 million people who carpool in many different countries. Please introduce me, because actually, during the lunch, I understood that not anyone knows Blablacar. Blablacar is a way to go on weekend and on holiday. The average trip is 300 kilometers. You've got another application for commuters. We're present in 22 countries, and we are developing, not trying to conquer more countries, but to increase the communities, the existing communities in the 22 different countries. Okay, what is the profile of these communities? Okay, Blablacar is a marketplace, so you've got drivers, the offer, and passengers, the demand. They've got different characteristics. At the beginning, the passengers used to be students and drivers used to be older. And now, with 14 million members in France, for instance, everybody can be a driver or a passenger. But if I want to be more specific, drivers are still a bit older and live around the cities, and the passengers are younger. Many students. The average age is 35 years old. They used to be younger, they used to be 27, and so now you carpool at all ages. You've got young retired people, and old students. So the counter profile would be who? Some people don't travel, are not used to traveling. They live where they were born and they don't need to travel, so they're not our target. And abroad, in other countries, spontaneously, people share their car. We work in 22 countries, but in some countries, we are less successful than in others, in particular in Mexico, in Turkey, in the UK. In the UK, I mean, we still work with 10 million members, but we don't invest much effort because we've understood that trust wasn't there and they work differently. Whereas they told us that in Russian it wouldn't work, but actually where people are used to hitchhiking, people are used to sharing their cars, Blablacar works. So at the beginning, your name was covoiturage.fr, carpooling.fr, and now your name is Blablacar. Blabla means speaking, and speaking are inverted commas, and they also look like the letter B. So do you buy a trip to go from point A to point B, or do you pay for an experience? Because 300 kilometers is a few hours sharing the same space as the driver. Okay, yes, well, first of all, you buy a trip, because the main criteria for choosing your trip, as a passenger, are very basic criteria, such as where you start, where you want to go, and the price, and also the trust you can have in the driver. For instance, whether you will travel with a smoker or a non-smoker person, etc. So that is the main point and the main points. And conversation is an added value. We don't sell the conversation. And actually, on your profile, you can say whether you like to speak a little bit, blah, normally, blah, blah, or very much, blah, blah, blah. This is the way you can understand who you will be traveling with. So we don't sell conversation, we sell a trip. And then, naturally, generally, conversation starts. But when we look at the figures, they are so huge because 94% of our members in France say they have very interesting conversations when driving. When you reach 94%, it's always almost sure that you will have a conversation, but we cannot promise that because you can also feel like listening to music while traveling. But when you are called Blablacar, and when your visual identity has been redesigned at the beginning of 2018 with inverted commas, conversation is within your DNA. And what was the purpose with the new logo and with the strengthening this conversation part of Blablacar? Okay, let's have a look at history because everything, seems obvious now, but 10 years ago, carpooling wasn't common. And when we started advertising, a lot of people said that won't work, just hippies will be interested in that. It will never be popular, but you've got 14 million passengers in France, 94% saying that it's always enjoyable to travel with them. But first of all, we had to teach people what carpooling meant. So, at the beginning, it was really pragmatic. And the beginning was, the idea came up in 2004. The founder had hard time to convince people, and I was the first employee in 2009. So he had worked for 5 years on his own. 5 years trying to gather people around him for this project. And today, why did we decide to rebrand Blablacar and to highlight the conversation part of it? Some people criticize this new logo. It looks like 66. It looks like a whistle. No, I said we wanted to have inverted commas. Maybe it's not obvious, but that was the purpose, the characteristic we wanted. And we wanted to highlight conversation because it is our DNA. It's the only means of transport where you can have conversation. This is the difference with our main enemy. And the main enemy is the lonely driver in his car. Each time you take your car, whether you drive for 5 kilometers or 400, we want the driver to think of sharing the car. So the difference between a driver alone in his car and Blablacar is the conversation. It has to be seen in our identity. And we've also introduced something new, but that is not seeable. When you don't see the algorithm, we have changed the way we work. So now we can see somebody traveling through a city. Before choosing the trip, you had the departing city and the arriving city. So now when we see what places the car goes through, we've got the possibility to add new contacts. We have changed. We're more focused on bringing people closer and on conversation. You've mentioned a figure that is striking. 94% of people traveling using Blablacar say they have interesting conversations. So you must have realized a study on the social impact. We like to make studies because we are the worldwide leader in carpooling, so we like to see what actually happens. So we've worked a lot on trust. If you look at Blablacar Confiance Trust, you will find our study. We've also understood the situations when drivers have the best practices, and the study about social impact was realized because it is in our DNA. The founder is a researcher by education. So once we got the conclusions, positive conclusions about the social impact, it is good to value carpooling, particularly with people who tend to distrust such a way of traveling, because people can be stressed out because they don't know how it will happen, etc. But when you're told that 94% said that they had an interesting conversation while traveling with Blablacar, it gives trust, it induces trust. So we do all of that in order to calm down people and show them that is a very normal way of traveling. More elements in this study. So we are in a place where conversation happens, up to 4 people, and 2 figures in particular. 69% of people who use carpooling speak of personal issues, and 29% speak about things they've never spoken about before. So what happens in a car, is it better than a shrink? Well, the answer. But before giving an answer, I would like to tell you where the discussion happens. A car is a closed place, but it's also quite a long time of travel when you have to go beyond hello, how are you? Because you can share this place for 5, 6, 7 hours, and you have enough time to have deep, detailed conversations. So this is the duration of the trip. And also, you have something that doesn't last for long at the end of the day, because you meet someone you will probably not meet again. You don't know the family names, for instance. And if you give me a secret, I won't be able to share it with other people, so it's completely confidential. And we look at the road, we don't look at each other. That hasn't been studied. So as you don't look directly in the eye, the person you speak with, you spend time together, you won't meet again, so it is the setting and with whom you have these conversations. Well, with people you maybe wouldn't have met without using carpooling. There is much diversity because drivers and passengers don't have the same age, don't have the same personal context, socially, culturally, etc. So it's a rich environment because an older person will advise a younger one. This is mutual support and different viewpoints. And the other figure, the impact on carpooling, on opinion, and the fact that after spending time with people you didn't know before, 51% of people say that that may change their mind on some issues. Well, some examples, yes. A trip with a feminist, 2 men in the car, not really interested by the subject. And after 3 hours speaking with her, not only on feminism, of course, but they are more aware of this issue, or homosexuality, or strikes. I remember traveling with a teacher a few years ago, and teachers were on strike, and I understood their movement because she told me about that. As a consequence, the fact that you meet people with a different profession, you understand their daily routine, and you understand the challenges they're faced with, their demands. These are sometimes extreme examples with militants, but waste management, for instance, ecology, many different topics can be dealt with in these conversations, and with more information, you change your mind. Another impact, I mean, I'm not used to traveling by carpooling, and I thought that it could be a selection criterion to choose people I've got common points with, common characteristics. And you told me that this is the point, actually. You have an anti-algorithm, Facebook algorithm approach, in a way. Blablacar, it's a social environment where you don't have this approach. And is it something you fight for? Why can't you choose to travel with somebody you share hobbies with, for instance? Yeah, it would be technically feasible to ask the driver what radio you like to listen to, what music, what are your favorite topics, and to mix up with passengers with the same tastes. But we don't like to do that because we favor surprise, and that induces conversations completely unexpected. Because if you like mountain climbing, you can speak with your passenger who doesn't know about that, and at the end of the trip, the passenger knows something new, and the passenger is generally happy to have discovered something he or she didn't know. Now, with my startup employee approach, we work with transport, and the more filters, and this is my experience, when you start something, when you market something, if you offer the passengers to use many different filters, let's imagine that at the beginning you've got the opportunity to use 100 different drivers between two small cities. So let's leave apart Paris. If I use filters such as, I want this type of car, I want this comfort, I want room for my luggage, this music, etc., etc., at the end of the day, you find one or maybe no driver. So the main criteria being the distance, the departure, the arrival, the price, because we know that our passengers want to save money, and safety completely guaranteed by the opinions. Then we want conversation to be a surprise. We tell people this driver is completely trustful, but you'll see what happens. Can you make a comparison with another universe, another social network? Okay, so is there another place where you can spend so much time with someone? Well, for how much time haven't you had a conversation, even with a friend, for 4 or 5 hours? That doesn't happen really often, so spending time with people you don't know and speaking with them, this is unique, and that is our asset. And this is why we wanted to have inverted commas in our logo, because we are the place, the time, when we speak. After reacting, I'd like to react to a question asked through Slido. You said the competition is not trained, the competition is drivers alone in their car. What about the autonomous vehicle? For Blablacar, we don't want to put in touch somebody who owns a car with passengers. No, it's more putting in touch people who go to the same place. So even for an autonomous car, there will always have this common point between the car owner and the passengers. Even autonomous trips like that will be meaningful, and it is more interesting to have many passengers even if the car drives itself. So we'll happy to work with companies dealing with such floats of vehicles. Okay, recently you've bought less, so can you explain what less is and what will be the impact on Blablacar? Less is a company that was launched by Gilbert Rudel, the Twitter founder, carpooling short distances for commuters, for instance. And we had an application, Blablaline, we still have it, by the way. And for us, this was an opportunity to get closer to less. And their team didn't have any manager, any director, and was doomed to give up. And for us, it was interesting to hire talented people who could strengthen our staff. So this is high-level hiring, very easy. We've spoken about that free, surprising conversation, where no one from Blablacar is there to monitor the conversation. Nevertheless, people tend to speak with passengers and drivers. How can you structure that? So before traveling, what happens with people who are put in touch through Blablacar? What do you want to develop with them? We don't want to develop conversation before traveling. We want to reduce it as much as possible in order for the organization to be as quickly as possible. I used to travel a lot. Now I've got 2 children, so I've got less opportunities. There are moments in life when you carpool a lot. And yes, nevertheless, today I'll go back to Paris with Blablacar. But now with 2 children, it's a bit more challenging to use Blablacar to travel. Sorry. What was the question again? How do you structure a conversation before traveling? Before, we want the dialogue to be minimum. Enough information on Blablacar for a passenger to be able to book just in 1 minute a trip. I say, I want to go from Nantes to Paris. That hour, I find a car and I book it. And if I have questions, we have to be able to give an answer as soon as possible, because if each time we have to send the question to the driver, but the driver may be working, so maybe we'll wait for the end of the working day to answer. And we want to be very efficient, because you've got other means of transport that can give a quicker answer. So beforehand, we ask information to the driver, how many people will be in the back seat, 2, 3 people in the back seats. Some drivers accept only to have 2 people in the back seats. So many questions are asked beforehand in order for the information to be available to the interested passenger, and the real conversation will start only during the trip. Because it's not interesting to have this conversation asking for the color of the car and the way I should dress up, etc. This is not conversation, this is just information, and we have reduced it to the minimum. And after the trip, well, after the trip, life happens or not. So it's you're free to keep in touch. 24% of people, actually, of passengers, keep in touch with the drivers, but very often they don't keep in touch. This temporary conversation finishes, and we ask our members to give their opinion, because trust is based on opinions. When you write to people, how do you organize that? So as soon as the journey is finished, the members are invited to leave a message, to leave their opinion on the journey. If you don't do it, you are sent a first email and a second email. We're also thinking of other means because we're connected with our members through alerts from the apps. So it's a mix of messages, or maybe we'll wait for the next trip when they see that they still do have to leave a message, to leave an opinion. And it's very important because the trust we built up between a driver and a passenger is just between two people, and it should be shared in order to induce trust. When I write it down, I can tell other potential passengers that this driver drives carefully, nice conversation, completely safe, etc., etc. And it's important to share this trust. Blablacar is almost a community brand. People have stickers on their cars. And as a community, how does it support you? Are you trying to increase it? It is very helpful because it's a co-building process. We're very close to our community. First thing, the member relationship service, and we don't like to say client relationship service, is completely within Blablacar, and we've got criteria of quality, etc., etc. Okay, now it's a bit hectic because due to strikes, etc., many members use Blablacar, but we try and answer as soon as possible. So we work very closely to our relationship, and because we also want to build trust between Blablacar and the users community. We also listen carefully to all the feedbacks. And we also organize events called Blabla Time. Not a long time ago, I was in a bar in Nantes, so meet-up events with our members to give them news, to tell them about the new possibilities given by Blablacar. And also, we listen carefully to what they have to say and how to improve our services. So we even have a platform for that, actually, to gather all the requests. So being as responsive as possible, we're here to serve them. And you have Blabla helpers. Yes, we do that. This is the upper level. So when you start on Blablacar, you're a beginner. And the more positive opinions you get, you raise until you become ambassador with 12 positive opinions, with a full profile where you have experience as a passenger and as a driver. You know Blablacar very well. You know both roles. So we write to these people and we've offered them the opportunity to become helpers in order to support the beginners or even people who use Blablacar for the very first time, who have just very simple questions, and helpers are here to support them. They get in touch directly with them, etc., etc. They explain the process. And it's highly valuable because the member relationship service, we don't always have time to give a quick answer to a simple question. We're here for the more difficult situations, so helpers on a voluntary basis support some people to start carpooling, because helpers love carpooling. I mean, their life has changed thanks to carpooling. They see their family, their friends more often, and they support the increase of this way of traveling. So you're supported by the number of positive opinions, the levels, and for the higher levels, they become helpers and they educate people. But if I have an issue tomorrow on a journey, I won't be dealt with by a helper. No, the member relationship services has been replaced by helpers who work on a voluntary basis. They're just here to give a hand. But we still have more than 100 people working with our members in case of serious issues. And a very last question, introducing the next meeting of this afternoon. So you're the first Blablacar employee, and you're known as Captain Culture. So if you have one tip to give about this culture, corporate culture, what should we do? I've got less than 1 minute to answer. Okay, so transparency. Our culture is very strong. It is shared, co-built with our members, and we formalized it in 2013, and the strength of Blablacar culture is transparency. The founders are completely transparent regarding the orientations, the projects. Every 2 weeks, we have a meeting, such as this one. We start working for 40 minutes on Wednesday morning before going to lunch, and all the teams, or many teams, update us about the very last projects. So much transparency, updates, allowing all the staff to focus on the same purpose, the same objective. We don't hide information. Everybody is involved, is engaged, and when we have the information, when we're involved, everybody feels responsible for organizing, for sharing the best ideas, the best practices. And it gives much dynamism, much respect. And if you share work with your colleague, if you actively work in a team spirit, you respect more your colleagues, and you have conversation with your colleagues and support, mutual support. Thanks a lot, Laure. Thanks a lot.